Yeah, I went to see Michael at Norfolk General Hospital, and what I saw was a young man, still a very youthful man, who is now battling something that he doesn't fully understand but believes is a post-vaccine injury. And here's a man who was healthy other than some asthma, and now he's trapped in the hospital with very little hope. And it broke my heart. We imposed measures on people in this country, and I feel we are now turning our back on someone like Michael. And I know he's not alone. I've been approached by other people who have suspected that they have post-vaccine injury, and they have a very difficult time getting anyone to actually do the proper tests to tell them what this may be. All they know is that they didn't have these issues prior to taking the vaccine.
So Michael has requested different tests and treatments, but so far he's been refused them. Can you explain why he would get refused, or maybe how the Ontario health system works for people like Michael?
Well, if we could actually figure out how the Ontario health system works, we could probably solve a lot of problems in this province. And it's not right. I mean, Michael is being denied tests, and there are treatments that Michael believes may help him, and yet the Ontario health system allows him to lay in bed with absolutely no recourse. It's wrong. If Michael believes that there's a treatment that might help him, if there is actually data and there's research out there that these tests, that these procedures might help him, then my goodness, why aren't we doing them? We have been in contact with the Ministry of Health. We are not satisfied with the information and the answers that we've received back. It's basically messaging, but we will continue. We will continue to push and say, what harm is there to actually try this procedure that Michael believes will help him? The alternative is he lays in long-term care now with zero hope of recovery, zero hope of ever getting better. Why wouldn't we just allow this man to actually have some treatment that he believes will help him? What is the harm? I don't understand what the harm is in a system where we see a waste of taxpayer dollars every single day.
So, aside from the treatments, Michael and some of the other vaccine-injured people that I spoke to, their biggest hurdle is they can't test for spike protein, and it seems to be the spike protein that is causing all the damages. Now, spike protein tests are available in the US, but not here. So it's not just Michael, it would be, or healing Michael, it would be information on all these people.
For helping thousands of people.
So what about these tests that can't even be done here? Why isn't there an antigen test for spike protein in Ontario?
That's a great question, and it's one that we will pose to the Ministry of Health. When you can go elsewhere and actually have that test done, we're supposed to be leaders here. The Premier talks about Ontario being this wonderful place to live, work, raise a family, and yet a very simple test, an antigen test that's being done all over the world, and we are not doing it here in Ontario, there's something very wrong with that. Well, if we could actually figure out how the Ontario health system works, we could probably solve a lot of problems in this province. And it's not right. I mean, Michael is being denied tests, and there are treatments that Michael believes may help him, and yet the Ontario health system allows him to lay in bed with absolutely no recourse. It's wrong. If Michael believes that there's a treatment that might help him, if there is actually data and there's research out there that these tests, that these procedures might help him, then my goodness, why aren't we doing them?
So are you taking any steps to try to?
We have been in contact with the Ministry of Health. We are not satisfied with the information and the answers that we've received back. It's basically messaging. But we will continue. We will continue to push and say, what harm is there to actually try this procedure that Michael believes will help him? The alternative is he lays in long-term care now with zero hope of recovery, zero hope of ever getting better. Why wouldn't we just allow this man to actually have some treatment that he believes will help him? What is the harm? I don't understand what the harm is in a system where we see a waste of taxpayer dollars every single day.
So, aside from the treatments, Michael and some of the other vaccine injured people that I spoke to, their biggest hurdle is they can't test for spike protein. And it seems to be the spike protein that is causing all the damages. Now, spike protein tests are available in the US, but not here. So it's not just Michael, it would be, or healing Michael, it would be information on all these people.
For helping thousands of people. And
so what about these tests that can't even be done here? Why isn't there an antigen test for spike protein in Ontario?
That's a great question, and it's one that we will pose to the Ministry of Health. When you can go elsewhere and actually have that test done, we're supposed to be leaders here. You know, the Premier talks about Ontario being this wonderful place to live, work, raise a family, and yet a very simple test, an antigen test that's being done all over the world, and we are not doing it here in Ontario, there's something very wrong with that.
So let's talk about the mandates. What mandates did the province of Ontario institute?
Well, they brought in a bunch of mandates that really didn't make sense. And many of them came from the Ontario, like the provincial health table. But they didn't make sense. It was one of the things that I really questioned when I was working for my predecessor. They would bring in mandates that didn't make sense to the public. So we were getting calls from people who would say, I can go pump gas and put gas in my vehicle, but I can't go to the car wash. The car washes are shut down. How is there a difference between touching the gas pump handle as opposed to touching the handle or the wand at the car wash? We saw it. You could line up in dollar stores, you could line up at Costco, you could line up at Walmart. No, hardly any restrictions for those folks running those operations, but you couldn't go into a mom and pop shop without a myriad of restrictions put in place. So people began to question those things. I questioned those things. And of course we saw, masks come in, we saw the 6 feet, and then of course the mandates on vaccines. And many of the people who were mandated to take a vaccine in this province, they did so, and they have questioned that after the fact. Those who did not take the vaccine were punished, and many of them, we talk about a shortage in healthcare, many of those folks have never been asked to go back to work. And we know that people who have received vaccines can still contract and pass on COVID to anyone around them. So many of those healthcare professionals, or anyone who actually worked with the public who was mandated to take a vaccine, is now questioning why they're still being punished in Ontario when there's no proof and there's no data that proves that the vaccine actually prevents transmission and worse disease.
There's a clip of Doug Ford coming out, well, many of the premiers, even Premier Kenny out in Alberta, saying, we'll never do mandates, that goes against our Bill of Rights, and then months later, boom, they're in. How did they justify that to people in the party, people in government? Where did this come from?
So I believe that politicians, like Premier Ford and many of the politicians who would take to the camera every single day, including the health minister, they said, we're not doctors. So we are taking guidance from the top doctors. But ironically, and I had this argument with my predecessor at the time, I'm not a doctor. I was told I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you why Hank can go to the gas station, but he can't go to the car wash. I'm not a doctor, I can't tell you that. But then when it came to the vaccines, they were telling Hank to go get his vaccine. But wait a minute, as a politician, you're not a doctor. So you couldn't tell Hank why he could do A, B, and C, but couldn't do, the rest of it. But now you're telling Hank, go get your vaccine. It didn't make sense to me. So you're not a doctor in one sense, but now all of a sudden you're encouraging Hank to go get his vaccine. So I think that the majority of politicians went, hey, you know what? This is above my pay scale. I'm going to defer to the doctors. And that was not the majority of doctors. That was a small group of doctors who were running those health tables. And we know that there were doctors and healthcare professionals in this province, in this country, who had an opposing view. And I also know that many of them were punished for that opposing view. They weren't allowed to question. They weren't allowed to go to social media and pose some of their questions and pose some of the research and data that they had collected without being punished.
I hear a lot of people, parents, say, well, the childhood vaccines are mandated, so it's no different than the COVID vaccine mandate. Can you explain the difference between the two?
There's a huge difference between the requirements for the childhood vaccine program that they run, and you have to provide proof or opt out in the school system. And that's the part that parents don't understand, is that there's a huge difference between that set of vaccinations and the COVID vaccine. Parents have always had the right and the opportunity to opt out of vaccinating their children against that whole list that the school board says is required. And there's a form for conscience belief and religious purposes, and many people exercise their right to opt their children out of those childhood vaccines. And I will add that there has been a drastic increase in people opting their children out of those vaccines since COVID.
I know I really went through them all this time when I got the list, and I say, okay, you get the ones that have been around for a long time, but if there's a new one, I'm going to wait if I can opt out. Just like, why not? I don't, you've lost all credibility.
And that's what parents say. They say, we have no problem vaccinating our children with things that have been tried and tested, but they do not feel that the COVID vaccine has been tried and tested to the point where they would actually give it to their child.
When we spoke to the doctor, the scientist, he said that the main test for the mRNA vaccines was the Ebola one. But before they could get any results, all the animals in the test died of Ebola. So we don't have any conclusive evidence. And then the first trials that they did with Pfizer, it was 3,000 people in the with the vaccine, 3,000 with the control, without the vaccine, and then 6 months in, they unblinded it, so everyone knew who was vaccinated and who wasn't, and then they said, everybody get your vaccine. So now we have no control group.
No control group.
But trust the science?
Trust the
I would have
science.
failed my science assignment
right.
if I did my experiment that way.
Well, and it was hard to trust science after Theresa Tam stood on national television, and this is when I began to question. Theresa Tam stood up and said, a vaccine is years and years and years away. This is why we all have to do our part. And literally a few weeks later, boom, she's now on national television talking about a vaccine and how everyone should go out and get vaccinated, and this is how the rollout's going to occur. How was anyone who is a critical thinker, how would anyone not question that? Wait a minute, 3 weeks ago, you are Canada's top doctor. You were telling us that a vaccine was years and years away, and all of a sudden, poof, there's a vaccine. How did she not know that the vaccine was going to be there?
Another thing about the vaccine is that for Ebola, the mRNA vaccines, they're really supposed to be one and done, not multiple shots. So my question really is, how in good conscience can our government, even if they don't know the answers, but maybe because they don't know the answers, how in good conscience continue to tell people to get boosters? How are we not just have a pause? Have a pause, do some research, get some answers. They're not, they're doubling down. Where's that come from?
That depends on who you ask, because I had understood that at some point the Canadian government had secured X number of doses of this vaccine. And I believe that part of the agenda was to go through those doses. And you're right, we should be pressing pause. COVID is well under control at this point, and why are we continuing to push people to stand in line for something that was supposed to be one and done?
Because we know that, well, now we're starting to see these multiple shots are what are causing the problems.
Right. In Michael's case, he was fine until the 4th vaccine, and it's very hard to turn a blind eye to the fact that his problem started the day after his 4th booster.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Can you talk a little bit about how come, why were Ontario universities so strict with their mandates compared to elementary and high schools? Why didn't the province push back on that? Because they were really long too as well. They extended passing. Do you have any insight into that?
I have no answers with respect to why things look differently from the university to the elementary or to the high school levels. I question that myself. My daughter was in university at the time, and she wasn't allowed on campus. She had to, remote learn either from home or from, in her case, she was in a basement apartment. She was absolutely no harm to anyone. You're not allowing her on campus, and yet it was mandated that she be vaccinated. And I did not understand that, but who is she going to harm? She's not going on campus. There's no ability to contract or transmit, and yet it was mandated. And there were a lot of parents who at that point were starting to question
How did they have any power to do that? How did the public institution, it's not a private business?
It's a good question. And some of those powers have been handed down. I know parents at who have kids in the elementary school system who are being still to this day by public health and by principals who have been told, go to these parents and tell them, we don't have proof that your child has a COVID vaccine or that we haven't received your schedule of childhood vaccinations. Why is that power being handed down to somebody who is just supposed to be administering the school? He's not, that principal, he or she, is not a public health official. They are not a doctor. And yet they've been given powers that actually, would lead someone to believe that they have some sort of medical background.
And so so where's the province stand on this, it seems? I mean, that's a whole other issue with these boards and associations that seem to have built moats around themselves and castles. Is this an issue at the for the provincial government? Are you guys talking about this? Like I see, we all are down here screaming, but
right. I think so many of us still have questions with respect to what happened during the pandemic. We still have questions about vaccines, and I feel like the provincial government, it's kind of like SARS. When SARS happened, there was all this research into SARS, and what they did is they took that report. They spent all this money diving into this. They took that report. They shelved it. It's collecting dust somewhere. We never pulled it out. We never pulled it out during COVID, as far as I know. And I encouraged the government during COVID, as a staffer, I kept saying on Zoom calls, why aren't we using every tool in the toolbox? We have a SARS report. We have, flu vaccines. If somebody is hesitant to get a COVID vaccination, maybe the flu vaccine would, provide a level of protection. There was never any answers to the questions that I had. And so I believe that the government at this point in time is going, it's done, right? We're tired. We don't want to deal with it anymore. And the questions are too difficult. They have no answers to those questions because all of those professionals who actually guided them in the first place, they're not talking.
Yeah, it was tough when people say, trust the science, trust the science. Do you know what they used to prescribe people for syphilis in the 60s?
Oh, ivermectin maybe?
No, mercury.
No. Mercury, oh.
Wasn't that good?
Yeah.
Let's trust the science.
Yeah,
and we can thank our opioid crisis to Purdue and OxyContin.
Right.
Who marketing campaigns said these aren't addictive. So why do I have to listen to trust the science when it's like...
But when we're talking about...
question, that is science.
Right. And when we're talking about things like OxyContin and some of the other things that, we know are harmful and that they're highly addictive, and yet we have governments who still allow them to be handed out like candy. That's a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's talk about the College of Physicians, because this is where we're at. I mean, the CPSO, number of doctors, basically all the doctors that I talk to won't talk to me on record for fear of losing their license. And so can you talk to that? I mean, 50 investigations since up to 23 and 30 physicians reprimanded. Who regulates the regulator here? What's going on?
Well, the Ontario government should be regulating, the college. And yet I've had the same situation. I've had healthcare professionals, I've had doctors tell me the exact same thing. Bobbi-Ann, I'll tell you what I know, but please don't use my name. Please don't tell anyone that we had this conversation. I've had parents of doctors who have said, I didn't take the vaccine because of what my my doctor child told me. And yet those doctors, those healthcare professionals were not allowed to question. They were not allowed to, throw up the opposing view. And, the college has a lot to answer for. They really do.
Is anybody going to challenge them on it? I wrote a letter just saying, requesting an interview, saying, look, this is what I'm hearing out there. That can't possibly be true, that you're telling all these doctors that they can't think critically. Can you come on camera and share your side of the story? We must be getting this wrong. And they won't, of course, speak to me.
So one of the things that I am working on as an MPP is who knew what. There's some work being done federally on who knew what at Health Canada, and I want to know at the provincial level who was knowingly complicit with much of what went down. And so I have a set of order paper questions that I wanted to table before Christmas, and I'm still working on them. I'm still working with some folks who are providing information to me with respect to those order paper questions. And we have a lot of folks who stood up and said, I'm not a doctor, but they were still part of the policy making decisions and the policy making in general, and they have to answer to that. And the college is one of them. You can't penalize doctors. You can't penalize healthcare workers with zero explanation, with zero confirmation that what you are saying is 100% correct.
Are these conversations going on, or is it just a few MPs and MPPs?
So the conversations at the provincial level, I believe that I'm the only person who is actually having those conversations. If any other MPP is having those conversations, they certainly aren't telling me. Now, I will divulge that there are groups who have come to me who have said their MPP is on the same path that I am on. But their MPP belongs to the government, and they're too afraid of being punished. And I know what that punishment feels like because I believe that I was part of that in 2022. I had worked, for my predecessor for 23 years. And yes, I wanted to throw my ring in the hat to become the MPP for Haldimand, Norfolk. And that would have been my hat. Did I say it the other way? Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to throw my hat. Okay. Yeah. So let's start that over.
I worked for my predecessor.
So I worked for my predecessor for 23 years. And I understood the ins and outs of government, and I have a huge passion for standing up for the little guy, the taxpayer, who's being punched in the face every single day in this province and in this country. And I was denied a nomination process. Keep in mind, I had traveled this province working nominations. I had traveled this province working campaigns all on my own dime as a volunteer, outside of work hours. And so I was loyal. I was loyal to the party. And in 2022, I was denied the ability to actually throw my hat in the ring for the Ontario PC party. And I believe it was for two reasons. Number one, I didn't support 40,000 people coming to the Nanticoke Industrial Park through the development of a giant subdivision, a city I'll call it. And number two, I had asked far too many questions as a staffer during the pandemic. So I'd worked for my predecessor for 23 years, and I had grown very attached to the community that I worked in, Haldimand, Norfolk. And I had a passion for the people here. I had passion to stand up for the little guy who was constantly being punched in the throat every single day from every institution, and as a taxpayer, paying more, getting less. And in 2022, I was denied the opportunity to actually throw my hat in the ring to become the PC candidate for the Ontario PC party. And I believe that was for two reasons. Number one, I did not support a city of 40,000 at the Nanticoke Industrial Park, as you can imagine, for a number of reasons. Number two, I had asked a lot of questions as a staffer during the pandemic. And I asked those questions not to be, a problem. I asked those questions because those were honest questions that were coming in to this office, when I was answering phones during the pandemic, working for the MPP at the time, there were hundreds and hundreds of questions coming in every single day from constituents who were confused. Some of them were crying, some of them were angry, some of them thought it was all a hoax. The varied opinions that came into this office were it was so incredible how people could be on so many different sides of the issue. But there were so many questions, and so I would go. We had daily. At first, we had daily Zoom calls with the ministries and with the Premier's office. And I would go on those Zoom calls and I would ask questions on behalf of our constituents. That was my job. My job was to ask those tough questions on behalf of the constituents. And we were never given answers. Never given answers. Once in a while, my mic would go, dead, whatever. I would get off the Zoom calls, I'd get a text, I'd get an email, I'd get a phone call from another staffer who would say to me, hey, thanks for asking that question because I was too afraid to ask it. And so I got the impression that there was this kind of edict put out there that we were not to question. I didn't get the memo, so I kept questioning. And then there was some point where I thought, you know what? Nobody is backing me up. I'm asking these questions. I'm getting these phone calls, getting these texts, getting these emails of people saying, thanks for asking, and I was too afraid to. Well, why are you too afraid to? At first I was a bit naive, and then I realized we're not supposed to question. And so I believe that I was denied the opportunity to run for the Ontario PC Party for two reasons, and the second reason would be because I asked too many questions during COVID-19.
Crazy. This documentary is going to be called "Why Can't We Talk About This?" which is basically what I've seen at every
and I'm
roadblock
terrified. I'm terrified that we're never going to get the proper answers. We're never going to, for the little guy who is now questioning it. And I think that despite how anyone felt about COVID-19, despite how they felt about the way it was handled, despite how anyone felt about vaccines, the taxpayer deserves to know the truth. They deserve to know the answers to the questions that are being asked of me. Did things work? Were vaccines necessary? Did we go about this the right way? Those are all very simple questions that we all deserve an answer to, and it should be an honest answer. If the government came out and said, look, you know what, we had no idea what we were dealing with, we dealt with it this way because we didn't know better, there might be some empathy, there might be some sympathy. But when they don't answer the question, when they dodge and they use messaging that people are now seeing through, it's difficult to have any empathy or sympathy for them. And my fear is that it's dependent on who gives you the data and the research and the answers. So there could be data, there could be research that comes forward, but in my opinion, much of it all depends on who's giving it to you. How do you trust it? Is there really true science nowadays? Because we know that it's paid for. So depending on who pays is the answer that you're going to get to hold up their narrative. Yeah,
very true. Yeah, it's tough. I think everybody was on, 99% of the people were on board for 3-4 months. Everybody did their best, Then it just for here, we were 2 years, 2.5 years. The kids still locked down from school. They keep saying we didn't know any better. You did. People tried to tell you, but you shut them down. That's right. What do you do about that? There
were a number of doctors who came forward and said, it's a bad idea to lock kids up. And what really struck me and hurt me is I have two young people. I had 2 young people at home during COVID. My son was in grade 10, and there were folks out there who would say, oh, these kids, they're on devices all the time. Those same people who accused our teenagers and our young people of being on devices all the time were now the same people telling us we better lock our kids in their bedroom with their device and don't let them out because they're a danger to society. What a disservice we did to our young people.
The whole isolation thing with children under 5, even under 10, that's bordering on child abuse.
And now
what
we're
you were
seeing
told.
everyone who
Yes.
everyone who comes to meet with me nowadays, post-pandemic, who deals with children, talks to me about the exacerbated level of mental health in our young people, and they're questioning why that is. There's no question.
I know.
My hope is that we will move forward and we can see each other, not as enemies anymore. I mean, the government and the media did such an incredible, and I'm not saying incredible in a good way, but they did this incredible job of pitting people against one another. And I think that's the saddest thing that I saw throughout the COVID-19 is the number of people who lost touch with their family or refused to see family, lost friends because they had opposing views. Never in our history have we seen that kind of wedge driven between people because of a health issue.
Last one then, and this is a little bit out there, but the doctor from University of British Columbia said, look into this bill, Bill C-293. Okay? Yeah. So I know you're provincial, so that's why it's a federal bill. Basically, it's, other countries have kicked it to the curb because it wants the World Health Organization to now supersede our own health care. But the province of Alberta has highlighted a number of things that have to do with land and farming.
Absolutely.
Okay, can you talk about that?
So Bill C-293 should be a concern for all Canadians, and I'm actually sponsoring a news conference in the new year on this bill, even though it's federal. But all of our Ontario farmers should be very concerned about this bill. It's being, described as a pandemic preparedness bill, and much of it is not about the pandemic at all. It's about land use, it's about livestock farming. As far as I'm concerned, this bill aims to get rid of us producing meat and eating meat.
That's what it reads like. I can't see there's nothing in there about, hey, let's get people exercising. Let's get people eating healthy. Let's make sure we have more sunshine. What can we do to keep people outdoors? What can we do to stop diabetes, obesity? Nothing in there.
Nothing.
Just control.
No. Control. And I think going back to one of my greatest frustrations during the pandemic as well, and I kept going to my boss at the time and saying, don't you find this peculiar? That the only things that are going to keep us safe right now is staying 6 feet apart and putting on a mask. I had done all my own research. I knew what I needed, to take to build my own immunity, to keep myself strong, to keep myself healthy, and it worked. And yet, the only thing we could tell folks was to put on a mask and stay 6 feet apart. That had nothing to do with building their immunity. Zero. How about going outside and getting fresh air? We actually tried to convince people to stay inside and do absolutely nothing. Never in our history have we done something that makes, such little sense as what we did during COVID-19. And we're going to see the fallout. We're going to see the effects of this for a long, long time. And I'll go back to my thought that I think that much of it's going to be immeasurable because it's going to be so great. It's going the effects are going to be so drastic that we're never going to properly measure them, and it'll be blamed on something else.
Did you and your predecessor disagree on this big issue during that time, or?
We did, for the most part, and it was probably the first time in our 23 years working together that we had such disagreement, and I'm shocked he didn't fire me because I would really take him to task. But we had a great working relationship, and we still do to this day. And I think he sees things a little differently. It's come around, and his family. He would go home and battle with them as well. And so he was hearing it from me, and he was hearing it at home as well, I believe. And but I think that he was scared. And sometimes people are paralyzed by fear. And that's what I see in government a lot. People who are paralyzed by fear, so they don't do anything. They know that their inaction is wrong, but that actually supersedes them doing something because that's far more painful. It's far more scary for them to actually go out there and do something. So I think that my predecessor fell into this trap of, I'm not a doctor. And this is what he was likely being told on his Zoom calls, likely being told by his caucus members saying, look, you know what? We're not doctors. We can't say A, B, C. But then when I really, what really bothered me was, okay, you're not a doctor for A, B, and C, but you're sitting on social media, receiving your vaccine, encouraging everyone else to go get that vaccine. Do you know that that vaccine is 100% safe? No, you don't. Do you know that vaccine is going to prevent you from contracting COVID? No, you don't. Do you know that vaccine is going to stop transmission? No, you don't. So you can't be a doctor in one sense and then claim you're not a doctor in the other.
Just a convenience there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But
to make them feel better on both sides. A lot of people like
that. But I think he was confused. I honestly believe that all of the information that was being fed through him in conversations that I wasn't privy to as a staffer, I think that they instilled this fear. And when you instill fear in people, it's amazing what they will or will not do.
Any final thoughts other than that about Michael or about the whole situation? Of anything else?
I will continue to fight for Michael. It really breaks my heart to see a man who was one day healthy and, functioning as a normal adult in society to now being in long-term care where he doesn't belong, and seeing a government turn their back on him, not even allow him the opportunity to try a treatment that he has done research on, and the research exists on this treatment. And government isn't even giving him the opportunity to try that. I feel like that is really, government turning their back on somebody who doesn't deserve it. And nobody with these vaccine injuries deserves to be treated like this. And I really worry about Michael's future. I really do.